Hey, what's up, Geekscape? It's welcome to a brand new Geekscape, and I think I've almost got that intro down. We're going through StreamYard again, and I'm just kind of getting used to things. Obviously, the pandemic allowed me to kind of start looking at options for doing Geekscape, and I said, wait, what about this streaming thing? And what about going to like multiple platforms at once? And it might be to the detriment. I don't know, but this is Geekscape. If this is your first Geekscape, we're going to be talking movies, video games, comic books, pop culture, all of that stuff. I like to sit down with a guest because no one really wants to hear me by myself. And we'll be bringing that guest in shortly. That's what we do every episode. And I hope you guys have been enjoying it. There's been a lot of episodes. We've done 4 or 5 in the last week. But it's ranged from everything from movies to comics to video games to music. Like, we've kind of run the gamut. Oh, and we also talked a lot of basketball. We've been talking about that Jordan Last Dance documentary. So I had a little bit of Jockscape going on here. So that worked. But who knows what's going to be on this channel. If you guys are listening to this on the podcast, there might be some visual stuff that is only on YouTube and Twitch and Facebook that doesn't make it to the feed. For example, I think that Heidi's going to cut my hair live on the stream on Thursday. It's getting a little warm out here in Los Angeles, and I have to go running at like 6 a.m. Before the heat in order to avoid other people, social distancing, but also because it's really damn hot now. And this is the longest my hair has been in years. And without the headphones, I'm starting to get like this Isaac Asimov sort of thing. Let me just show you guys. My sideburns are getting a little out of control, but before I go full Isaac Asimov, I kind of need her to cut my hair, and she's been wanting to do it. But I think, why not throw a little wrench in things and have it done live? And you guys can leave comments and let us know if she's doing a good job. Maybe tell her like a little bit to the left, a little more off the front. You guys, it'll be like Twitch plays Pokemon, but you guys will be deciding a little bit of the haircut. I'm just gonna warn you, she's probably gonna do whatever the hell she wants, but let's at least pretend that you guys have a say in things, because ultimately you only have to see my haircut for an hour. She's got to deal with it through this quarantine. Okay, so really she should just be giving me a full face mask or something. That might be the best solution. So that's coming up on Thursday. Podcast listeners, you're not going to want that. It's not going to be fun. At the same time, I'm interviewing people for the podcast, and that stuff doesn't usually show up on the stream if they only want to do something over Zencaster or something that's audible. So if you haven't subscribed to the Geekscape podcast, well, that's probably why you're here, because you've subscribed to the Geekscape podcast. But vice versa, some stuff's going to go video, some stuff's going to go audio. We're going to feel our way through these things, but we're going to keep bringing you stuff. All right, let me tell you about my guest. His name is Dan Murrell. He used to be on Screen Junkies. That's how I met him. I was one of their panelists, one of their experts that he'd bring in to talk about, well, comic books and movies, the things that we talk about here on Geekscape. And over the years, we just kind of talked here and there. Maybe I'd see him at a convention. I think I did Tournament of the Nerds once at a WonderCon. Is that Screen Junkies? I think that's Screen Junkies. I think Dan's involved with that, definitely. And every now and then I'd come into Screen Junkies and give an opinion. But to me, Dan was like the Screen Junkies guy, because he's, no offense to the other Screen Junkies guys, he seemed to be the guy who knew what was up. He definitely, whenever I talked to him, he knew movies. He just had a faculty for this stuff. And then I look up a couple weeks ago, and Dan had started his own YouTube channel. And maybe we'll talk about why he started his own thing and left Screen Junkies behind. I don't know. Geekscape's clearly my thing. And you guys remember way back in 2006 when I used to be part of Revision 3? It's time to do this. It's time to do your own thing. Let's talk to Dan about it. Maybe he's waiting right now to come on the show. Let's go ahead and add him. Here he is. Dan, how are you doing, man? Welcome to Geekscape.
I'm good. How are you? It's good to be here. I wish I could take credit for Tournament of Nerds. That was all Hal Rudnick and Justin Donaldson. But there was a lot of crossover. It was like
a lot of crossover.
Yes.
And I love Hal. Hal's the guy who brought me in, and I like Hal. And Heidi, you'll remember Hal as the guy who Heidi's behind me. Check her out. There she is. It's kind of like the thing we do now on the show. But that's what happens when the studio is in Heidi's quarantine bedroom. So yeah, Hal's great. And I remember at Comic-Con one year, we ran into Hal on the street corner, and he was eating pizza. He's like, "Hey man, what's up?" And every like medium-sized white dude with dark hair that we've run into at every industry thing since, whether it's Comic-Con or a screening. She's like, is that the guy from Comic-Con? We've never seen Hal again.
Said funny stuff.
He's just a funny guy. She remembers him as being the funny guy.
He said happy Comic-Con and he was drinking coconut water with his pizza.
Oh, that's right. So
Al Rudnick has been preached. He's been preaching the gospel of coconut water to me for years now. He loves that coconut water.
Are you not a coconut water guy?
I'll have it. But it's like he for me it was because and it actually worked. He's like, Dan, if you're gonna drink too much the next morning, drink coconut water. So it actually worked.
Yeah, I figure the dehydration thing. You geeks, this may be news to you, Dan, but not to the Geekscape, because I don't drink. But I'm often dehydrated, and coconut water is a good one. So so far we're doing okay. We're pimping coconut water.
Yeah.
This is my first time doing this streaming thing, and we've got the Twitch, the YouTube, the Facebook, and then Periscope. Now, you're an expert on the streaming stuff. You worked for a streamer for years. Periscope, still a thing, Dan?
I will say that I have not personally used it in a while. I know that for us it was kind of I don't want to say a fad, but I'd say right around 2016, 2015, late 2015. But I'm sure there are many wonderful and devoted Periscope users who still use it. So I would say it's established.
It just reminds me of when we were at South by Southwest, I think 2010 or earlier, and everybody was like, "Hey man, you got to get on that Meerkat." And about a week after South by Southwest, it was never the Meerkat again, except in jokes and reference to the show. But Raymond, I think your full name is Ray. He just checked in and said Periscope for the win. So at least we have Ray watching on Periscope. So
there you go.
Good job. So what a time to start your own YouTube channel talking about film criticism.
Yeah, not part of the plan. It was it wasn't and the reason that I'm okay with going into detail on any of this is because it really was the most amicable sort of, if you want to call it a split, but parting of ways that you could imagine, in the sense that it was planned as we talked about it. We went through the steps. There was no cloak and dagger stuff. It was all above board, and the one thing that was not planned was the timing of this. But at the same time, I would be here working from home now regardless. So it definitely gave us a little more time to prep the studio, and it's been a change of pace, which when you're looking for to grab onto anything at all, the change of pace has been certainly reinvigorating. But yeah, it is quite the time to be at home working while with everyone else unexpectedly.
Well, let's talk about it, because you've kind of seen the full gamut of people with their individual channels, and some channels starting out small and turning huge, and then being absorbed by MCNs and the whole multi-channel network thing. Mm-hmm. And then you start seeing these different kind of corporate entities. I don't know where they come from. I know that they get their funding, and it's almost like there's gold in them hills, and they just kind of come out of nowhere. They buy the channel that you work for, and then things start changing. Collider, for instance, had a big turnover in January because everybody on the web wants to see what works and what doesn't work. And if things don't work within a very small window, the strategy's out the window. And it almost begs to question, and Dan, you're the guy who knows a little bit more about this than I do. I just sit here and read comics. Is there ever really a strategy with this stuff?
Well, I mean, I think that the idea of gold mining is an apt metaphor, because it is, it's all it seemed like it was all about speculation. You're either buying a channel that's established and that you're going to be able to monetize at scale, or you're building something that you think but is going to be able to monetize at scale. And I think that that's why a lot of the, we escaped, for lack of a better word, Defy Media very shortly before they literally went out of business overnight when we were bought by Fandom. But we were still working in the same building, and we saw that happen literally next door to us. And I think what they struggled with, from what I've read in the articles and from what I've read everywhere else and talked to friends who are now most of them thankfully have landed elsewhere, and most of them with the same channels. It's this question of how, that there's money to be made, and you can project how much money is going to be made, but you can't. It's not like a lot of other markets where things are set in stone. There's so many variables. If YouTube changes its algorithm, that can vastly change how much money is coming in from ad revenue and stuff like that. Or Facebook was a huge game changer when it seemed like, and now it seems like they were overblown by a huge proportion. But when it looked like the future was video on Facebook, that changes an entire business model. And then when that doesn't pan out, that changes an entire business model. So the challenge, I think, in trying to build a digital media business, particularly one that is like one of these MCNs, where you're housing several different networks, you're pumping a lot of money into programming, you're pumping a lot of money into overhead and staff and HR and everything else. Those are great jobs to have for people that wouldn't normally have them if they were just running a YouTube channel from their house. But you run the risk of not being able to monetize it in time, or figure that strategy out. And I don't envy anyone who has to do that strategizing, because it is literally like building something on quicksand, in the sense that you never know when the bottom is going to drop out of a particular element, and you're going to have to rethink everything. So, this is a time of great fluctuation in this industry, and I think that's why you're seeing a return in a lot of ways to people doing stuff from their homes, people doing this on their own as independent channels, because for a lot of companies, they were not able to crack the code on how to consistently monetize all of these channels. And unfortunately, a lot of people, hey, listen, a lot of people got jobs for a very long time because of it, but at the same time, a lot of people lost those jobs. Some of them very suddenly. Defy Media. I had a lot of friends at Collider that just were told one day that they didn't have a job anymore because they were changing their strategy. It's a very unstable business, I guess, is what I would say.
Buy stock in Periscope. I'm just taking notes. I was listening to what you're saying, and I figure if it's as much a crapshoot here as there is there, like Ray says, buy stock in Periscope. I might just the Periscope thing might come back. It might be the thing where, like when Justin Timberlake came back to MySpace and tried to turn it into like just a full social network for music fans. And
exactly,
I think that lasted a few hours on a Thursday. And
yeah,
and then it's like, no, you're never going to get that investment back on MySpace. I just remember when I first started getting into this whole idea of the MCNs was our friends at Machinima. And Machinima was kind of my entry into that, because I had created some shows for Fox, and Fox Television Studios looked up, and I don't know, I can talk about this stuff. It was 2007, 2008. I had developed these two shows for Fox, and their whole goal was to get them on the Xbox network. Remember when Spielberg came out and was like, we're going to make a Halo show on the new Xbox, at the time 360, like it's going to be the center of your entertainment system at home. It's going to be your it's all going to go through the Xbox, and we're going to have basically our own Netflix type thing. And it never happened. At the same time, there were studios like Fox Television Studios, which is now not a thing. It wasn't a thing before Disney. It got absorbed. They were going out and trying to make short form content, and they were influenced by things like Felicia Day making The Guild and stuff like that. And they were like, hey, let's make short form content. I remember making two shows for them. And one day I'm filming in Kenneth Hahn Park, and one of the executives from Fox shows up, and I'm like, they're usually not here. And they said, hey, Xbox ain't happening. And suddenly there's no, you've spent tons of money on these things and there's nowhere to land.
Yeah.
And that seemed like the first, and so what we did was we pivoted. I think that stuff all ended up on Hulu for a short amount of time, for a couple of years. But I remember meeting the guys at Machinima. We talked about making short form content there. And then slowly, when Machinima was over on Gower, do you remember them when they were over on Gower in Hollywood? And it was just like, I think they were renting space out of the Hollywood Production Center.
I know the Hollywood Production Center.
So they used to rent these offices out of there, and I'd go and meet with them and talk about what we could make. And then one day, suddenly they're in that office on Santa Monica in West Hollywood, and it's super nice. And it was when they got that influx of cash. And suddenly there's like really nice cars in the parking lot, and you can't just walk in and talk to your friends. There's new dudes and new guys in charge, and you realize they all came from, like, no offense to them, middle management Hollywood kind of thing. And I don't think they knew what the parts were. So, like, they wanted the head to move or they wanted the leg to move, but they didn't really know really what the audience was connected to. It just seemed like this influx of cash was, we got to get people who know what they're doing. And they went to almost an entirely different industry to find those people.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who made a web series on his own that was very popular, that went, viral, I guess. That's kind of an outdated term at this point, but it got very organic popularity. And he would talk about the fact that he got called in, brands would call him in. He probably did 5 to 10 or however many meetings. And they would all be like, okay, now we want you to come make a viral video for us, or tell us how to make a viral video. It's like, I can't sit here and tell you how to make something that's organically popular. That's the point, is you just make it and you see, but that's not a business strategy, because they're like, well, no, how do we guarantee success? And that's always been the struggle when you talk about people coming in, because if someone sees something that's popular, then they think that you can make a lot of money off of it, which maybe you can, but also it's tough to tell somebody who's not necessarily in the business of making stuff and knowing how the internet works, who's been doing other types of traditional media for decades. Like, I can't guarantee you that it's going to be good. We can't market test it. It's completely, it's up to luck. Sometimes it's luck. And if it gets picked up on Reddit or it doesn't get picked up on Reddit, or if the right person tweets it or doesn't tweet it, like, it's so ephemeral, but people want to guarantee success. And so they think that by flooding all of this money into something, they can guarantee that it's going to be a success. And that doesn't necessarily always work. It'd be great if it did, because it keep a lot of people more consistently employed. But, we started a streaming service at Screen Junkies back in 2015, Screen Junkies Plus. We were the first Plus streaming service. And we were ahead of our time. But what we always struggled to sort of get across was, we had full control over the programming, but we didn't have control over, things like it was all app based, and the app didn't work. Mm-hmm. And, and so it was launching and the app didn't work. And so we're losing our minds, because we're saying, like, this app doesn't work, but they're saying, like, oh, don't worry, we'll fix it as it goes along. We'll fix it in a few months. And, we're saying, like, you don't understand. It's going to be too late in a few months, because if we launch and people can't watch what we're doing, it doesn't matter what we're doing in a few months. And we could never get that message across. And that's largely what happened. Was we launched with the product that we were happy from a creative standpoint, but the technology wasn't there. We couldn't get that message across that you have to wait, because they're like, we can't wait. We've already pushed the date once. It's like, then it's going to be more expensive because you're going to launch something that doesn't work. And that's what happened.
Backwards engineer all of that stuff. You have to then go back and be like, and conform it to something that the ship has already left.
Right.
It's already halfway across the Atlantic when you're like, wait, we need to fix the rudder.
Right.
Or it's already taking on water. You can't just start patching holes then. It's halfway across the Atlantic.
Yeah, and so that's I think that's always the struggle, is when you're bringing in people to make stuff and you have kind of a more traditional power structure. It's that thing of just like people saying, like, okay, we're going to make you operate like we do. And it's like, no, you need to operate like we do, because, it may be more chaotic and it may be less organized than you're used to, but that's also sort of a lot of times how it works. But I think that's largely why you're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of these places sort of, they expanded at a massive rate and now they're contracting at a massive rate, because it's this idea of trying to apply a traditional sensibility to new media, which is almost impossible. People can do it on an individual level a lot more easily than a company can do it at a company-wide level. I just think it's too unstable. It's so difficult to do.
Well, you'd think that people in the film industry, and maybe this is just a lesson to middle management film executives, period, because it doesn't seem like it's a lesson that is, is learned very often. But it's almost like they want the film industry or any creative industry to work like the Ford assembly line, and it's not before, but yet make a unique product every single time. And I think that it's multiplied 1,000 times over when you go to something that is so particularly niche based as the internet, right? Like a Marvel movie ain't gonna save you on the internet. It might save you at the box office in Hollywood, but then you got something like a DCU or something like that where you think you have an Avengers, but you got a Justice League, or you think that there's all these problems to creating this content by committee and creating this content in some kind of formulaic way and expecting to have the Ford assembly line. It's not the Ford assembly line. These are unique things for a constantly shifting audience with constantly shifting needs. And as we see right now in the middle of a pandemic, no one really knows how to predict the box office going on right now. And when you go to the web, where people are that much more into smaller, idiosyncratic, niche content, it gets even harder to hit the target. And they're still shooting at it with fucking like bazookas or nets. And they need to be doing the precision sniping thing.
I mean, and I think that's, Screen Junkies initially grew when, when I started, there was maybe 3 or 4 people that worked on it, and then not even full time. And we kind of grew and established ourselves at a time when we were not a priority for the company. At that time, it was Break Media. They had a lot of other stuff going on. They were in MCN. We were sort of a pet project on the side. And then as it got more popular, what we were doing, we became the focus. But then when we became the focus, then it sort of became like, okay, now you're going to start operating a little bit more like we do. And it's like, well, no, or you could trust us to do what we're going to do. And, but everybody answers to somebody. And right. So it's just like, it's a constant struggle. But I will say when we were bought by Fandom, one of the things that I really respected that they said right out of the gate was
kind of choppy there, Dan. At least on my side,
sorry.
You're a little bit choppy. You're reconnecting. Hold on, Geekscape. There you are. Okay, I got you back.
No, I was just saying that when we were purchased by Fandom, when Screen Junkies was purchased by, nope.
Yeah, by Fandom. No.
Okay,
you're there. You're good. I was like, hey, he's gone. You're good.
One of the things I loved was that, they sort of said, hey, we're new in the video space and you're our video team. And so, we're obviously going to strategize, but for now, you guys do what you do. And that's largely what we did for a while. And that's great. I think that's the right attitude to have when you bring in a video team that has had success in the past is, we're going to be a little flexible on our end because we're going to trust you to know what works, and then we'll develop a strategy together, which is ultimately what happened and what is happening.
When you have something like these different initiatives, right? Like let's just take Collider for an example. In January, they let a lot of their panelists go. Yeah. But they had this other thing going on there where they had these deep fakes, right? Where they would use this deep fake technology to fake other celebrity impersonators and things like that. And I can't wrap my head around it. I really don't know how it works. I just know they were hugely successful over there at Collider, and suddenly they look at that stuff and they say, okay, let's put all the resources into this. We're going to have to let all these panelists go. Mm-hmm. As a panelist or a producer for that kind of content, does it create the environment where you are rooting against another member of the team, where you're saying, hey, that initiative across the hall, that might be my walking papers in a few weeks if this thing takes off? And how do you keep that level of, like something like Screen Junkies, how do you keep that level of camaraderie when you realize that the guy working on a new pitch for a new thing, if that takes off, they might see you as expendable?
I mean, I think it goes largely to the culture that you establish at a place. And, I'm biased in the sense that most of the people who were let go at Collider were and are really good friends of mine. And I think that the way that it was handled, the process of how they were let go was very unfair. And I think that they were spoken about afterwards in a way that was very disrespectful by certain people that work for that company. So, I'm not the most unbiased person when it comes to that situation. But I will say we were and still are, Screen Junkies still is, and now that I've gone, but it remains very team-based. And so we've never had an environment that fosters that kind of competition. the thought has always been that if there's a new concept that does well, that's great because it's a win for the team. Obviously, if you produce or come up with an idea, that that's even better because you get to make more of it. But we never had an environment where I'm wondering like, oh, if Spencer comes up with an idea that's better than my idea, then I'm going to be out because we can only do so much. We were a very team oriented and team-based system, and I think that's one of the reasons why Screen Junkies is still around, is that it really is about everyone working together. And if someone has a great idea, it doesn't matter who has that idea, let's all rally around it and let's make the best version of that we can. So I was very saddened to see what happened at Collider because those were a lot of great people. I think the only silver lining to that is it happened at a time where this is moving a little more toward people being able to establish this and do this on their own. And so, I've been on Mark Riley's show and Roxy Streyer's show and John Roca's show, and they are all hustlers and they work their asses off every single day of every single week. But I really do think that the culture, particularly perhaps there, fostered more competition than I think is maybe... you don't want to see that because I don't think it's healthy in my opinion.
So then why did you take off like Kane and Kung Fu and do your own path? You're like Bill Bixby, man, like walking the freeway there with his thumb out, doing your own thing. That was something you wanted to do for a long time. You were waiting for you're like, you know what? I feel I have the confidence. I'm going to do it. This is the right time. I've injected the virus into the system and everything's going to shut down. Let's be honest.
Not at all.
You created this COVID so that you could shut everything down and get a head start. I'm ready.
No, I would. No, not at all. No, I
go to a periscope. Work.
Yes.
Never mind. That's a stupid joke.
No, well, as I mentioned, when Screen Junkies was bought by Fandom initially, they just said, do what you do. And they provided us a lot of funds to even expand our programming, which we had not been able to do in quite a while. But over time, the company sort of was developing their own strategy. They're building their brand. It's a global brand. And over time, it sort of became clear that, there's a lot of stuff we did that I still enjoyed, but there was some stuff that I wanted to do that's a little more niche. We talk about the fact that when you're on your own, it's a little easier to be niche. There was some things that I wanted to do that were a little more niche, that weren't quite as broad, that were going into specific filmmakers and doing more analysis and film essays and stuff that, people enjoy. But when you're talking about the overall picture, it wasn't exactly working toward the big picture ideas, I think, that the company was looking at. And so, it was, like I said, it was a long process of talking and figuring out, is the timing right, and figuring out what are my options, what can I work on, what can I not work on. And ultimately this is where we ended up. So it really, really was a matter of, I'm kind of going in this direction, and I sense that the company's kind of going in this direction, and it's just time. And I felt like I had to make the move that I felt was right for me, was right for where I am right now, both personally and my career, the career that I'm trying to build. And so, this was the time I chose. I chose the time before I knew that, obviously that this was all going to happen as far as COVID goes. And it certainly made leaving more complicated and more difficult, because I didn't get to say goodbye really to anybody. We all just sort of found out one day that we're not going to be going into the office anymore. So it was all done by phone and on video chat. So I do miss that I didn't really get the chance to properly spend the last time that I had with that team. It was really just, the time was up. It was time to make the move, if I was going to make the move, or if I wasn't, to commit myself, in fairness to them, to commit myself fully to the strategy that they wanted to go toward. Because to split my time or split my allegiance, I understand, like, you don't want that. It's not fair. It's not fair to the people I work with, and it's not fair to myself.
What if we throw you a party when this is all over? Like a farewell party, like a going away party, or hey, you've got a new channel. I'll throw the URL back on there. A launch party, right? You got this new Dan Murrell movies channel where you talk about all this stuff that a lot about you, man. Like the the film criticism stuff that you're doing, that you've done for Screen Junkies, but now you're going to throw like full bore into on your channel. Like, I didn't know you were such a big Trek head. Like, you're a total Trekkie. And
Yeah.
I watched all of Picard, and that's kind of like good for me because Heidi's into Star Trek, and I'm kind of like the guy who's like, I'm into Star Trek. I think it's cool. Farscape's my thing, as you can tell by the name of this podcast. But I watch Picard because I'm like, oh, cool. It's loud and it's bombastic and it's, cinematic in the way that, like, I think JJ had a hand in introducing into the Star Trek universe. And then now it's got some curse words in it, which I think, like Discovery is it's just getting the stage ready for that Tarantino Trek.
Yeah.
But,
it's like they're priming it.
Like, that's my kind of Trek, and I enjoyed it, but obviously I didn't know the idiosyncrasies of the series or how this and that. It was as annoying, I think, for her as when we watched the Watchmen TV series, and she's like, "What does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean?" If she finally just paused it and says, "Hey, listen, I can't just explain Star Trek to you, like, as we're going along on Picard because you're annoying the shit out of me." Like, what? You're just gonna have to watch it. What did you think? And then really to get to know you, Dan, like, was this what you wanted to do as when you were like a little kid, was film criticism and like get to know movies, and like, who were your heroes? Was it the Ebert and Siskel and stuff? What was going on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, for as far as Trek goes, that's actually what you describe. I think I found that it's fairly common, which is that for a lot of people, the less they're into quote unquote classic Trek, which would be pre-Trek 09, pre-JJ, the more they're into the new stuff. Which I get, but I think it also underscores a lot of the problems that fans of Star Trek have had with the new stuff, is that it feels so different. So very different from what's come before in many ways.
Welcome to being a Star Wars fan, assholes.
Right? Exactly. But you see that divide. That's not uncommon. So I'm not surprised to hear that. Right. But yeah, as far as film criticism goes, I always knew I wanted to do something with movies. And for me growing up, Siskel and Ebert was largely my entryway into movies that I had not heard of, because this is in the early to mid 90s when I'm kind of coming into my own as far as loving movies on a level more than just as entertainment. The independent movement of the mid 90s, your Pulp Fictions and your Fargos and stuff, it didn't really, from where I grew up in Arkansas, get to that part of the country really at all. I mean, it's much better now. Now there are 2 or 3 theaters where I grew up in Little Rock that have screens that will run films like that. But at that time, that was not the case. So a national show like Siskel and Ebert would introduce me to these movies that I'd never heard of. And then when they came out on video, I'd seek them out and see what all the fuss was about. Roger Ebert in particular was a very big hero of mine, because I just love the way he wrote about film and talked about film. And I had the big compendium books of his reviews, and he helped me kind of learn the film language and the language of criticism. Siskel and Ebert sort of get a lot of flack for the up-down polarization of film criticism. And, I think some of that's justified, but I also think that neither of them, but particularly Ebert, gets enough credit for their wonderfully written prose reviews that were not what was on television. It's what would run in books and in the newspaper. So initially I thought maybe that I would be making movies, directing, etc. And I tried my hand at that, writing stuff, and I enjoyed it. But the more I got into movies, the more I realized that I enjoyed analyzing them. I enjoyed sharing the ones that I liked. I enjoyed finding new ones. And so the critical eye and the critical perspective just appealed to me more and more. And I had a chance at Screen Junkies to sort of start doing that. And it led me down the road to where I am today.
Have you, did you ever get a chance to meet Roger Ebert?
No, it's one of my great, he of course had a major health event several years before he passed away, but it was still always one of my life's ambitions to attend he would do Ebert Fest, he'd run a film festival every year, and he would do like film festivals at sea, and he would do these lectures in Colorado where he would just do like a frame by frame of a film over like 3 days. And it was always one of my dreams to get the chance to at least meet him or have some contact with him, communication, just to express my gratitude. And unfortunately, he passed away before that could happen. So that will always be something I regret, because he really, really was a great influence on how I view film, as he was for a lot of people.
And I think I agree with you that, a lot of people do kind of remember Roger Ebert as like the loud early Roger Ebert, when you know him and like amongst where he's still kind of making films, but he's making like Return of the Valley of the Dolls kind of stuff, and they think of him as like a little bit loud, but his writing was ultimately like what put him on the map. It wasn't the guys in front of the television reviewing things thumbs up and down. It was for both he and Siskel. It was the writing. At a South by Southwest, I believe it was 2000. It was the year that he died. I remember meeting him. He was giving my friend Robert Pickering, who hasn't been on the show since I think 2009. He had a film play at South by that year, 2010, 2011. And I was standing with him when Ebert was in the lobby after the premiere, and Ebert couldn't talk. His mouth his jaw was gone, but he could sign, and he was signing how much he enjoyed the film. And I was just like, this is my chance that I'm going to see this guy. And he's talking to my friend Robbie, and it's like to be in the presence of somebody like that I've been in the presence of before because of Geekscape, things like a Stan Lee or somebody who has some cultural influence that you just have to look back and be like, I'm glad I was next to him for even moments. George Romero being another one, I think. Holby, you might be that person for other people though, too, Dan. And like this new channel that you're doing might influence some people. We got this guy Holby Run Faster on YouTube, and he's saying, I'm excited to see Dan's next project. Still the people's champion on movie fights. You walked away a champ. I think you might owe them another bout, because can you do that? Can you take the ball and go home? Can you just like, game's over, I win, bye?
I don't want to. As far as I'm concerned, I still have a movie fights championship to defend, and I stand ready to defend it at any time. I don't want to be a paper champion that just walks away and claims to be the champion forever. I would love to be a fighting champion, and I look forward to the day when they invite me back to defend that belt, because I am still the current movie fights champion.
Any chance to put that? The belt, are you going to put it behind you and maybe the studio, maybe talk a little trash in that way? Like, I'm looking at your studio, it looks a little sparse, but maybe like that's the simplicity is like the key there.
Well, I'm in between shoots. This is the remnants of a shoot that I did earlier today, and then I like to switch things around for every shoot because I want it to, the set to look as fresh as it can. So this is the remnants of a review that I was shooting earlier. So it's usually a little more stacked. But that they kept the belt. The physical belt belongs to Screen Junkies and Fandom. So I had to leave the belt there. But as far as I'm concerned, the championship stays with me.
I try and change the studio every now and then as well, but Heidi says, don't touch a damn thing. You're lucky to be dating me, which is basically how that works. So Geekscape is, if you're bored with the studio, if it's getting a little stagnant for you, just I'm not in control here. Let's just be clear. Like, this is the way it works. Wizard of Video Games on Twitch says, what about Joe Bob Briggs and his amazing return? Joe Bob Briggs and like the MST3K guys, like that was a little more my speed, but I'm missing a couple brain cells. And those are kind of my influences where I was like, oh yeah, I think I could grow up and be like Joe Bob Briggs. I can't.
Yeah.
Or the film reviewer from Gremlins 2. I think that's kind of my speed. You mean
Leonard Maltin?
Leonard Maltin. I think I'm thinking of Leonard Maltin, who I do like, but I'm actually thinking of Christopher Lee's character.
Oh, gotcha. Yes.
Who's like the mad scientist.
Yes.
If he was a film reviewer. What about Joe Bob Briggs and these other like kind of reviewers? Were you into that? Like the personality-based ones?
Yeah, like I said, that was particularly guys like Joe Bob Briggs that were on cable. Again, that was a conduit for a lot of people who would be cut off from this kind of stuff. Not only in the before independent cinema sort of encroached even further into the country, but pre-internet as something that everyone has in their home and that they're constantly connected to. The idea of these creature features and Joe Bob Briggs being like the the host, that's another one. Leonard Maltin is one critic that I've had the chance to talk with on several occasions. He's been on my show a couple times when I was at Screen Junkies, and he was one of those things that for years when I would watch any Star Wars movie, the first face I would see when I pressed play was Leonard Maltin's, because every tape had an interview with him and George Lucas on it, and so I think it's the idea that I could be that version of that to somebody else is sort of beyond my comprehension. Like, and the biggest compliments I get is if somebody says that to me. But it's so, knowing how meaningful that was for me, for those folks like Leonard Maltin and Roger Ebert and these folks that I associate movie with, discovering movies with. I'm sort of like, I kind of feel like Rod Burgundy when somebody says that. It's just like, I don't believe you. It's so flattering. It's really the most flattering thing that you could say. It is really, really kind of overwhelming sometimes.
Well, I think you would have liked, man, we should have been best friends like growing up, because you would have loved growing up in Austin, because we had that South by Southwest, and like, I just remember being there from the early 90s. Like, they would still show movies at the, the Dolby Theater, which is like, it's a dorm. It's one of the UT dorms, and it had a really dingy movie theater and like a food court. And I just have so many memories of growing up in that culture where around the time that you were talking about, that mid 90s indie film thing, it was like, that stuff was huge for me. And like Spike, Mike, Slackers, and Dykes, like we had Richard Linklater right there as a hometown hero, and then suddenly you have Robert Rodriguez coming out as a hometown hero, and all that stuff. Like, that culture seems like the one where like Dan Murrell would have gone nuts.
Oh,
and it was
definitely.
wasted on me.
Yeah, no, come on, no, I doubt that. No, it is, and mine was very different. It was watching Siskel and Ebert and hearing them talk about this thing, like Fargo is the first great American film, and blah blah blah. So that would be like, oh, I got to go see Fargo, or even people that were a little older than me, sort of guiding me through this. Like, I remember working at my mom's office one summer, and the kind of the cool temp who was working there, who was like the young woman in the office, probably in her early 20s or mid 20s, is like, you got to see Clerks, and like, it slipped me a copy of Clerks for me to watch. Like, it was very much more of an organic thing, which is it's a different experience, but it also has its own kind of romance to it, I guess, its own mystique, and it's largely one that's gone because people are so connected now and movies are so accessible, which, by the way, I think is great. That people have much wider access to movies through streaming services and theaters. But, there is this sort of romance thing to finding these films that you didn't know existed and having to go hike and have people that were more connected than you find them for you. I guess there's a form of that still exists, but, it's... I don't know.
Having that person at the video store who's like the tastemaker or a record store to be like, hey man, have you seen this or have you heard this? Like, what were those films early on? You said Fargo, you said Clerks. Like, what were those movies like that young Dan was like, oh, these operate on a different level than Jurassic Park? And obviously Jurassic Park is fucking Jurassic Park. It's amazing, but it's a mainstream Hollywood blockbuster. And if you suddenly saw something that was like a little bit different or a little bit more like a particular taste, like, what were some of those movies for you?
I mean, Pulp Fiction was a big one for me. I still remember because Pulp Fiction was one of the ones that broke through into the mainstream. So I remember my mom seeing it, and I was like 11 when it came out, so I was way too young to see it at that time. But I remember my mom talking about it. She's like, oh, I saw that. I'm making her sound a little more sub. She's like, I saw this movie. I watched Pulp Fiction. It's so weird. It's like these people are talking in the beginning, and then you don't see them again till the end, and it's all out of order. And like, in my mind, it's just like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so finally getting to see it, and it does challenge, my brain's conventional concept of storytelling and all of that. Chronology. So that was definitely a bit of a mind scrambler for me, seeing Pulp Fiction for the first time. And then even in college, going into college, movies like Memento and Requiem for a Dream really keyed me into to the very specific frequency that some filmmakers can operate on. And then, 1999 was a huge year for movies because that's when you saw the mainstream kind of take up the risk taking of independent films. So movies like Fight Club and Sixth Sense and South Park and Matrix and Being John Malkovich, like all hitting that year. Blair Witch Project. I mean, that was if you're going to talk about maybe the most influential year for me as a young film goer, 99, I'm 16 years old. I'm right in that sweet spot as far as like building my taste, and to have that kind of renaissance of a year right in the middle of it was hugely influential for me.
It feels like these things happen in 30-year cycles, because when I hear you talk about 1999, I'm thinking about 1969, when you did have the movies like Bonnie and Clyde going up against movies like Cleopatra, and you have like an Easy Rider, and we're just on the beginning of this explosion going into the 70s, where you have films like Five Easy Pieces or Harold and Maude, and these filmmakers that start leading themselves to become the big genre filmmakers. You can argue that the Memento Christopher Nolan, who becomes the Dark Knight Christopher Nolan, can be the USC George Lucas, who becomes the Star Wars George Lucas within a decade. These things are happening, these filmmakers. And then if you trace it back to the years that we're talking about, which were super influential to me, those years in the early 90s where you start to see Clerks and Slacker and that stuff. I think I'm about 4 or 5 years older than you are. Those are the big movies for me. And you trace them back, you start to think about, post World War II, and then as you start to get into American cinema coming out of the 50s and 60s, you start to see stuff like I guess that whole French New Wave movement that was super cool in like the 50s and 60s. Finally, we start having like single screen art houses that used to be just the movie theaters.
Yeah,
they become those art houses, and you start to be able to see a Kurosawa movie, or you start seeing like a Truffaut Godard movie, and people are like, holy shit, what is this crazy shit?
Yeah.
So something like, do you ever see that movie Weekend? I think it's a Godard movie, a Truffaut movie, and it's fucking crazy. They kill a pig on camera. It's completely jump cutty, and you're like, I don't know what the fuck is happening. It's making you sick.
Yeah.
But you start seeing that stuff, and you're like, whoa, now I can see why there's jump cuts in Easy Rider just within 10 years. And I think we had the same thing happening in the 90s, where things are shifting so quickly as a reaction to 80s blockbuster, the Goonies, Star Wars, like Indiana Jones, these big ass blockbusters that turned into James Cameron, which is awesome because James Cameron's fucking James Cameron. T2 is the shit. But there's a reaction to that. And I think that the reaction to that, to James Cameron, was you start to get the Kevin Smiths, and you start to get the all these different filmmakers that with MTV coming into the game, start giving themselves people who are used to just being like, hey, I found a fucking Bolex, I'm going to run around with the Beastie Boys and make shit.
Yep.
And they're learning to be these filmmakers who are soon going to start making some big stuff, leading to 1999.
And I think, when you say it's cyclical, I think that I think we're at nearing the end or beginning, however you want to look at it, of another cycle, in the sense that like the explosion in the 90s, the explosion in the 60s, a lot of it was led by people who felt like big studio films, that Hollywood films did not speak for them or to them anymore. They had gotten too big, they'd gotten too bloated, and they wanted to start an independent movement to where you could really express yourself. And I think we're at that moment right now.
Well, it's technologically driven too, because TV kicked the shit out of film. Yeah, and when TV kicked the shit out of film, you started seeing things like Fox in the 60s being run by a skeleton crew by like a 24-year-old, right? Like that studio was run by a dude who was like 24 years old, like Zucker Jr. or whatever his name was. Like he put Cleopatra almost destroyed Fox. And as we know, like, Sony is sitting on the lot that used to be MGM. Now MGM's a tower in Century City. Like, the studios aren't sustainable. So I ask you, when you look at these things, like, I won't let film students come to me with their films and use the excuse that they didn't know what to shoot on, because like John Cassavetes would have murdered for this camera. Yeah. He had to fucking duct tape a Bolex together and run around shooting stuff. He would have murdered for this. This is a better camera on this iPhone than has been around for the first 100 years of filmmaking. And I won't let Like, come on, stop using excuses. Is that the revolution you're talking about? Is it a digital one?
I think that's the current revolution. It's the fact that there are now tools available to filmmakers at a price point that is unheard of, that can allow them to compete with any other, maybe not a Marvel movie, but any other movie that's not a big special effects spectacular that comes out there. Bo Burnham can make Eighth Grade look like a movie, what's that?
I thought it was the best movie that year.
And it was a great movie. Yeah, it's this idea of the for lack of a better word, the democratization of the ability to make films. Is that the change in this movement, I think, is that filmmaking tools are now available at a price point and to such availability that anybody with a vision, anybody with a good story and the will and the drive to do it can make a film that doesn't look amateurish, that doesn't look cheap, that looks like it belongs just as much as any other movie, whereas that wasn't necessarily the case even 20 years ago. Right. I think that is going to has already proven to be a huge advantage to this upcoming generation of filmmakers. And I think it's going to continue to be an advantage because that's another barrier gone between a great storyteller potentially and a great story being told. I think that's very exciting that possibility now exists.
Will Periscope be part of that? And anyway, like this Periscope thing, please, because I just spent my entire stimulus fund on Periscope stock, please.
I think I'm going to say you're in good shape. I'm going to say that the next big thing is Periscope movies.
Well, what do you think about this little theory that I just kickstarted when I saw this comment in the check out this comment that we got. It said the 90s for me was all about Hong Kong. And what do you think about the globalization that we're going through, where it's something like, we have our World War Z and we have our 28 Days Later, but obviously like what was that the one where they're on the train, the South Korean movie, Train to Busan. That fucking movie rules. And yes. now it seems like different countries are all speaking the same filmic language. But to go back to this point off of Twitch, the 90s for me was all about Hong Kong. And obviously, John Woo was like a big influence in the 90s and obviously a big influence in the 80s going into the Tarantino movies and things like that. But Choi Hawk and John Woo and all those guys, what do you think about that kickstarting that 30-year cycle? Because I do go back to the 50s and 60s and movies like the Godzilla and the Kurosawa movies landing in the States for the first time there in the 60s and influencing people in a big way. How does this work?
I think that's the other exciting thing is that you don't have to work as hard or you don't have to luck into finding filmmakers like you did, before. You see a filmmaker like John Woo who had such a massive influence on everyone else. So imagine John Woo with 10 times the reach. And that's the world that we're living in today where, Train to Busan, great movie.
Incredible.
How many fewer people would have seen that movie 20 years ago if it wasn't on Netflix? It would be maybe a cult film, maybe.
It's a cult film now, but
right.
It's getting a sequel.
It's got, but the audience for that film, and who knows who that's going to inspire. That's the other interesting thing is not only the availability of filmmaking tools, but the availability of films to future filmmakers. I think we're really going to see it start paying off dividends even more than it has already. The last year was one of the most exciting years for me as far as movies go in a really long time. Just the breath of fresh air and the new visions that I saw from a lot of these filmmakers was super exciting, and it really makes me feel like we are on the cusp of, special films come out every year, great films come out every year, but it makes me feel like we're on the cusp of a real revolution where people have greater access to filmmaking tools, greater access to distribution. And, we're now going to start seeing the byproducts of a generation that's had more access to film than any other generation ever before. I think it's a very exciting time to be a film fan.
Well, we're stuck in a pandemic, so let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Maybe not this exact moment, yes.
There's also this thing that is kind of the equivalent of, I think, the television of the 50s, is this idea that we have to compete against video games and interactive entertainment at this point. So, I worry, especially now. I was talking to you before the show about how I read this morning that Trolls World Tour made more for made as much in 3 weeks for Universal as the entire first Trolls movie made in 5 months, because of the costs of theatrical distribution and how much these theaters take from the studios. And listen, I'm not going to cry for Comcast or any of that, but at what point do the studios look up at these tools that we're talking about that you and I use, like digital distribution, and they say, you know what, this isn't just for indie filmmakers anymore. We can use this to distribute our next movie, and plus it doesn't help that the TVs are now as giant and they look like people have theaters in their homes at this point. And so if you're a dad and you want to take your family to Trolls World Tour, the economics are simple. You can spend $60 to take the full family to the AMC and deal with whatever you run into, or you can do $19.99 and put it on your big TV and you guys rent it for the weekend. You can watch it whenever you want, start it whenever you want, and end it whenever you want, pause it, walk away, and you get the same experience for a third of it. Meanwhile, Universal's happy because they're now taking 80% back they don't have to pay for prints, they don't have to pay for distribution. They just have to put some P&A together. That stuff's going to become digital sooner or later, and they end up with 80% of the box office rather than the 50 or less that they after sharing it with the distribution channels in the theater. Like, at what point are theaters just going to kind of become niche experiences?
Well, I do think studios are definitely going to start doing this more. I think there's going to be filmmakers that'll quit filmmaking before they allow their movies to go to VOD, like Christopher Nolan. I don't think a Christopher Nolan movie will ever be made that doesn't play in a theater.
Well, you think about some of these technology plays, right? Like we saw Ang Lee do it this year with Gemini Man, right? Like he was doing, what was it, like 150 frames a second, 120 frames a second on this thing.
It was an exhausting experience, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, but it worked for, we were talking about him earlier, it worked for James Cameron, because if you wanted to play Avatar and you wanted to play it the best way, you had to buy James Cameron's 3D projector. And so James Cameron, every time you watch a 3D movie, James Cameron's making some money off those Marvel films, because those theaters that are using his projector that they bought for Avatar are paying him a little bit of chunk of change every time you sit down to watch the Avengers movies. And he didn't even have to lift his finger to make those things. He just has to let it play. And we have a technology play that also didn't work with the Hobbit movies when those things were shot. And what was it, 48 frames a second or something big, like a 60 frames a second?
60 as HFR, yeah.
These technology plays are going to keep happening as more and more people turn to video games and turn to online content and online distribution. They got to find ways to put buzzers back under the seats and put people back in the movie theaters. What do you think the next one is?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, though, is I think when we talk about the cycle is it's different technology, but that is also what gave rise to the great independent surge of the late 60s and early 70s. Was TV was kicking movies butt. And so they said, we're doing smell-o-vision. We're doing 3D. We're doing cinema scope.
Buzzers under the seats. I can't wait for the buzzers under the seats.
Exactly.
I can do without, but maybe.
Yeah. But they were trying to get people in for the spectacle. And ultimately, what got people back into theaters was filmmakers like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, who were entrusted by these studio heads to make their films that became the new blockbusters and got people back into the theaters. So I don't necessarily know if there's a technological fix. To me, it's another cycle of let's trick people into watching movies again. I think if you make great movies again, then people will go and they'll see them. Maybe not as many as before, because you're right. The theatrical market is going to get a little more niche as the competition increases. But I think there's always going to be people that are going to want to go see a great movie. I think there's still going to be a large chunk that want to go see it in the theater. And I love people like distributors like Neon and A24, who now at this point in time, all of the other distributors are looking for a different way to make money. folks like Neon and A24 are rallying around their filmmakers and saying like, no, we trust you. We're gonna put a big marketing push on this or a big advertising push on this, and we're gonna play your movie in theaters. And they're succeeding, maybe not on the scale of a Marvel movie, but they're still succeeding. I think you're going to see a bigger rise for a lot of these distributors that commit to that, because filmmakers are going to want to work for them. They're gonna make money in theaters, and I think that I really, really do believe, is the theatrical business as a whole going to continue to draw the money that it does now? Probably not, but I think that you're also going to see a sort of counterbalance thing of some distributors and exhibitors committing fully even more to the theatrical experience. And I think that there's going to be a big slice of the public that appreciates that and is going to respond to that.
Oh, I do not like that view that I just cut to, but I did want to say that I think you're right. And I worry that the overhead of these theaters will make them sparser and less of an investment for companies to start them up. And it's, we had the 70s, and the 70s turned them into a mall culture, turned them into a multi-screen experience, and now we had these big theaters, and it's kind of sad going downtown and seeing these old single-screen theaters turned into swap meets and things like that. It is I have a big romantic part of me for the old Hollywood that built those places, and we'll see where it goes from there. I think that it's nice to see something like a barcade spring up, and to think about how people still want to act communally, even when they're doing something as individualistic as playing a video game that they could play at home. There's something to be said about that communal experience of going to a barcade. And maybe films, or the advent of something like the integration of virtual reality into a film experience. And I think it's within the next 10 years that we have something that augments our film experience. So you and I can easily go and see the same movie. I'm sitting next to you, but the character of Joe in my film is played by Ben Affleck, and you're watching Matt Damon, simply because they reskinned it based on the preferences I've had in my movie going past. And that everything, he's drinking a Pepsi. Well, let's be clear. They would both be drinking Diet Cokes, because that's what you and I drink. But
that's true.
But you can see how the product placement on down, everything is specified based on the information given to you by the phone that you use to buy your ticket. And now everything on the screen is a little bit different than the person sitting next to you. Yeah. Maybe even the story. I think we're within 10 years of that experience.
Maybe so, but I think it's similar to how we started this whole thing, with the idea of these companies trying to manufacture viral videos. I think that studios over the decades have tried time and time again to improve on the theater experience. What's the next best way to watch a movie? What's the way that audiences are going to watch a movie now, in the future? And by and large, all of them have been fads. Even, the fact that the 3D projector, that's great for James Cameron. But if you look at how many people are choosing to see movies in 3D, it went from a majority initially to now most film goers, according to research and everything, most film goers are choosing to watch a movie in 2D in a theater, projected projected digitally, but projected the same way that they were and have been for decades. I think that there's this thing, this need on studios' parts to say, like, what's the better way to watch a movie? What's the better way to watch a movie? I think most people like the way they watch movies. I think if you're in a movie theater, then that's the experience that you enjoy. There's a reason that it's hung around this long. So, I think that innovation is nice, and I think that a lot of times these new tricks and whatever are fun and cool. But maybe this is the romantic in me. Maybe this is me just being old and out of touch. I honestly think that audiences at the end of the day are always going to go back to the traditional film watching experience, because I think that alone is transportational. It has its own sense of magic and whimsy. And I don't think you need to add to it. I really don't. And I think the reason that people don't go with these technologies is because they get sick of them, and they're like, I just want to watch a movie.
No, I think you and I are cut from the same cloth, brother. Is that the kind of analysis you're going to be doing on your channel? Like, talk about your channel a little bit, and I'll let you go. So cool there. You will once you speak about your channel.
You must not leave until you plug your channel.
Oh, please. I love the idea. Listen, no offense to Screen Junkies, but I really don't like the trivia stuff. I think that it's like I think it's like a trick. I think it's like, let's see how high you can jump. And it's like, come on. I'm not a big fan of that stuff. And Lon brought me in to do a trivia game, and I brought Bibiani with me, which is how Bibiani ended up with you guys. It was the first time, and I said, okay, I got a guy, you never heard of him. We started Bibiani here at Geekscape back in like 2008 or 9. He was working at Staples, and I love Bibiani to death. Super proud that he's like turned this whole thing into a career where he's reviewing movies because he's fucking awesome at it. But I remember Lon asking me if I wanted to be on some trivia show, and I said, I get really nervous doing those things, and I don't like it. It's like somebody being like, jump, man, and I'm like, I don't want to jump. So I invited Bibiani on, knowing that he is a juggernaut.
Yes, he is. I have faced him in the Trivia Schmodown many, many times, and he always gives me a run for my money.
And so Bibiani and I were up. I forget who we were up again, but Lon said we broke a record, and we just did it, and it was awesome. It was so much. It was against Sasha. We were up against Sasha. I love Sasha, and Lon was like, and I was like, you got to hold on to this guy. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. So tell me about your channel. It's not the trivia thing, like, because the trivia thing wasn't working. Like, it's this kind of talk, right? The analysis, the thought, this kind of thing. Is that what you're going into?
I mean, that's largely it. Is I think the game we brought you on was Movie Games, which was something we did when we were doing Screen Junkies Plus with Jeremy Johns, and I do play. I play in a competitive movie trivia league called the Schmodown. But the one thing that I will always say, and that I don't think is fair, is like stuff like trivia is like, that's an indicator of how good you are at trivia. That's not an indicator of how much you know about movies necessarily, or how passionate you are, or how valid your insights are. I mean, I think it's a completely separate thing.
It stresses me out so bad.
Right. It's like, I know some of the most brilliant minds. Like I used to review movies with Roth Cornett all the time.
I love Roth.
One of the most analytical, insightful people out there about movies, had no interest in playing in the Trivia Schmodown, because she rightfully knew that if she went out there and didn't perform well, that there would be a slice of the audience that assumed that she didn't know anything about movies. And that's so not true and so unfair. So I think that everything has a place.
I would be the guy who comes out and just hits people with the belt, or like with a 2x4. Keep in mind, Dan, my brother was a WWE wrestler. Like, come on, it's in the genes. Like, we can come out and like hit you with a sledgehammer or something. I don't know, but actually, like trivia. Oh man, count me out on that one. It was your show is going to be a lot of this analysis stuff. Like,
yeah, I mean, really, the reason that I decided to start my own channel was because I really enjoy talking about movies. It's something that, I've done a lot of promoting and stuff. I've done, a lot of podcasts, a lot of shows, and it's something that I always enjoy doing, because if you get me going on movies, I'll just talk and talk and talk and talk. It just spills out of me. And the concept that I could maybe do that for a living is still kind of an alien concept to me. But, I love breaking down movies that I love, which is going to be a big part of the channel. I love the box office, obviously, is a big thing. Like, I don't look at it as, I don't like how a lot of the coverage of the box office is about like who won and who lost. I much more prefer it to be about like why this movie did it, why it did, and why it didn't do as well, or why maybe people are saying it didn't do well, but it actually didn't do that bad. There's a lot of misperceptions. I just think it's an interesting study and a breakdown of behavior and marketing and everything like that. It's I love going deep into this kind of stuff, and it's much easier. It is a little more niche, and I'll talk about the MCU because I love the MCU, and I'll talk about Star Wars because I sometimes love Star Wars, and but of course I'll talk about that stuff. But the opportunity to kind of say, when I'm on my own and I'm doing my own thing, it gives me permission to say like, hey, I'm just going to go off into my own world here. I'm going to go down this weird rabbit hole. And if it doesn't work and nobody watches it, if it turns out terrible, then the only person whose time and resources have been wasted is mine and the people that may have decided to watch it. It's nobody else is on the line, is on the hook for it. I'm not taking time away from working on another project that I should have been working on or could have been working on. That's energizing to me because it gives me the freedom to sort of go whichever direction I feel like I want to go. So I'm very energized and excited by it.
Well, Dan, thank you for allowing me to waste your time going down this little rabbit hole. I mean, you just basically described my motivation with Geekscape. I'm like, yeah, you know what? It's just me, and thankfully Derek and Matt helped me with the thing, and George helps me with the thing. But really, the ship goes where you want to steer it.
Yeah.
If it's a bad idea, you can always move direction, and it's not like that MCN stuff that we were talking about earlier. It's you, and it's your pure voice. So I'm excited to see what you've got up there. Geekscape he's already got one of the chartings up on the channel. If you guys check it out, I'll throw the URL back up here. It's Dan Murrell Movies on YouTube, and if you guys search for it, you'll find it. You'll find it. He's already got thousands and thousands of subscribers, but yeah, he's got a video breaking down Picard. He's got a edition of charting, and then if you want to go back to the source, he's got a video just saying, hey, this is why I made a channel and left Screen Junkies. So there's already stuff up on the channel that's worth checking out, Dan, and I hope the Geekscapists jump on it, because I would like to think the Geekscapists are a little bit more cerebral.
It sounds like we'd be kindred spirits, and if anyone decides to make the jump over, I certainly hope they enjoy it, because the community that we are building and have built so far has just been so incredible and ready to debate and talk about things respectfully, which is wonderful. To share opinions. I know for now, I understand, but I'm in the honeymoon phase. I'm going to enjoy the honeymoon phase, and then, I'm sure that some people will come in later, but right now it's just been so just energizing and kind of reinvigorating and encouraging what's happened over there. So, anyone who, my other thing about it is, if we disagree, I'm not going to yell at you. I'd certainly go on Dan rants, but I don't yell at people for their opinions. I just yell at movies for being terrible. It's all about, like, I understand you're not always going to agree with me. I'm not always going to agree with you. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss that. Let's break that down. Why is that? What did you respond to that I didn't? That's fun. That kind of discourse is fun and energizing for me as well.
Well, thanks for coming on the show. And real quick off of Twitch, I think we got a clarification. Geekscapists are a little more serial than cerebral.
I'm very serial as well.
There we go. Okay, well, we've stocked up here for the pandemic. Dan, dude, thanks for coming on the show, man. Thanks for having you. And again, guys, go check out Dan's channel, Dan Murrell's Movies. Not possessive, Dan Murrell Movies on YouTube. Just search for the man. You're gonna find him, and you're gonna find some really good, smart stuff. You heard him here on Geekscape talking smart. You're gonna subscribe to him on YouTube. He's gonna be talking smart again. And me, you know what you got here. We've been doing Geekscape long enough. It's gonna be like, oh, Jonathan again. Well, maybe he'll say something funny or hurt himself, but we'll see. Dan, thanks for coming on the show, man. Anytime. All right. You want to talk movies? Anytime. Hopefully we're out of this pandemic soon and can sit in a theater seat again.
I hope so too. Yeah, man. This is a great time, and I'll come back anytime you want me.
All right. Thanks, dude. Thank you so much. Geekscape is definitely go subscribe to Dan's YouTube page. I found it to be a lot of fun watching this stuff. I'm like, hey, this is great. This isn't loud and brash. This is just a dude thinking about movies because he loves them. And that's what we do. We love movies and comics and video games and pop culture. And that's why we do Geekscape all the time now. I'm doing multiple a week. Love you guys. Subscribe on the podcast if you want some more of the audio stuff. I'm recording stuff for the audio that doesn't end up on the stream. And of course, if you like the stream, share it with your friends. We're going to be doing some visual stuff here that doesn't end up on the podcast, like on Thursday when Heidi cuts my hair for the pandemic. Love you guys so much. Share Geekscape with each other. And until next time, peace.